All right, here we go. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the PC Perspective Podcast. This is episode 441 being recorded on March 16th, 2017. I'm Ryan Shroud.
I'm Jeremy Hellstrom.
I'm Josh Walrath.
And here in March 15th, I'm Ken Addison.
Wait, is it really March 15th?
Yeah.
Yep.
It is March 15th. This was recorded.
When you're hearing this, it's probably March 16th, at least.
But I definitely said recorded on, so this was recorded on March 15th.
There was no escape there.
This is not recorded in the future. Clearly, I'm not at the office, and clearly, based on the decorations behind me, I'm at a hotel.
Is that a shower curtain or a real curtain?
The best lighting was in the bathroom, so that's where I decided to set up shop. Seemed to make sense to me. But so I have a limited schedule here. We're gonna walk through some of these early stories, the things I think the ones that are crucial this week, the ones that I kind of had a hand in, and then I'm gonna hand it off to the rest of the team to finish up. So we're gonna talk about a bunch of stuff. Including, what are we going to start with here? We're going to start with the GeForce. I can't see the rundown on the side from this 4x3 display, so everybody knows why I can't see what's going on. By the way, quick things here. I assume since I can't see the rundown, we still have pcper.com/subscribe if you want to watch our live streams, which we recorded on Wednesday nights, 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific. And if you go to that URL, pcper.com/subscribe, you will get a little form here for you to submit your name and email address, and we'll send you a notice when we do live streams like this or like the ones we did last week with Tom Peterson from NVIDIA. And obviously, we still have our Patreon campaign going. That's at patreon.com/pcper. That allows you to do a direct monthly contribution if you think the work that we are doing here is interesting or useful or effective or entertaining. Any of those categories really qualify, in my mind, for you to be able to contribute to what we do and have your say in there. So patreon.com/pcper. We really appreciate that. Anybody that adds or creates a contribution while I am on the show this evening will get a shout out during the live cast as well. Okay. Now are we on to the first story, guys? Is that where we're at?
Correct. GTX 1080 Ti.
No, it's the Ti, damn it. I don't understand why we have to have this debate. Do you really say Ti?
No, I just want to ruffle your feathers.
Tom legitimately says 1080 Ti, and apparently there is a debate inside NVIDIA on whether or not it's Ti or Ti, and clearly the answer is Ti. So the GeForce GTX 1080 Ti, it's not a surprise anymore. We talked about this last week because they announced everything except reviews going live. We've already talked about the specifications. It is actually the fastest gaming graphics card we've ever tested. It does exceed the performance of the Titan X Pascal. It's based on the same GPU, GP102, 3584 CUDA cores. It's got a higher base clock and a significantly higher boost clock, like over 100 megahertz faster on the boost clock. Same texture units. The one interesting thing, again, is the memory. It's a 352-bit G5X memory bus. With 88 ROPS and 11 gigabytes of memory as opposed to 12 gigabytes of memory. But even though it's 1 gig less on the capacity, it's actually 1,000 megahertz faster on the clock speed. So we're actually running at 11,000 megahertz instead of 10,000 megahertz. So 11 gigabit per second memory speed there, which is good. Same TDP, essentially, slightly higher, 10.6 versus 10.1 teraflops of peak compute. $699 is obviously the crucial thing there. So like I said, we talked about the specifications and what the capabilities of this thing really are. What I think is important to look at here is kind of the rough sketch of what performance looks like. I don't want to walk through all these benchmarks. So this is what we try to avoid. We want to point you to go to pcper.com to actually look at the content there. But in general, the 1080 Ti is on par or up to maybe 5% faster than the Titan X Pascal. And in my testing, it does range anywhere from like 25 to 40% faster than a GTX 1080. And NVIDIA claimed out that it was 35% faster, 1080 to 1080 Ti. And I found a couple of instances where it was a little bit higher than that. I think it's even as high as like 47% once. So actually 50% in Dirt Rally at 4K, for example. It's pretty impressive results. We're looking at 75 up to maybe almost 100% faster than the GTX 980 Ti, and similar to the Fury X as well, somewhere in the 80s percent range faster than that as well. And obviously, it's single GPU. Everything is very consistent. Everything is very smooth. The frame times are very consistent, and you don't really have any kind of stutter issues. For single GPUs that are this fast, there's really no concern with frame times or latency or anything of that regard. So as I look at another one like Grand Theft Auto 5, it's basically on par with the Titan X. It is 37% faster than a 1080 at 4K, and it's 105% faster than a Radeon Fury X at 4K as well. So, I feel like we talked about all the specifications and products and capabilities of this card last week, so I don't really feel like we want to harp on it a whole lot more. Power consumption wise, it is a little bit higher than the Titan X, which is interesting because they both have the same 250 watt TDP, but the higher speed memory is an effect, right? There's an effect on having higher speed memory, so that's going to add to the total board power a little bit. And an interesting kind of technical hurdle or technical kind of background note for this is that when they wanted to make the 1080 Ti, they kind of had to expand the pool of available chips, so it's called widening the yield, if you will, on what chips they accept to go into that product. And when you do that, you get more variance in the chip-to-chip performance, and that's in performance of clock speeds or in performance of power draw. So, when I kind of asked NVIDIA why is this chip using more power, they kind of said, well, because of that added variance, you'll see some cards that will draw a little bit more than other cards, whereas when you're in tighter tolerances on the yield side, you're very restrictive on what the power draw is. It doesn't go, it kind of hovers right at 250 watts. We did measured the power from the PCI Express bus, from the external power connectors from the power supply, and none of them kind of exceeded their limits. We didn't have any more issues like the initial batch of RX 480s that came out. So everything seems in line and expectations there. It's a little bit quieter than a Titan X as well, based on our testing. It's close. It's pretty darn close. But it is a little bit quieter, and it's kind of basically right on par with the GTX 1080. And I think a lot of that comes, or from what I'm told, that comes from removing of the dual-link DVI port and allowing more airflow so the fan doesn't have to work as hard to push more air across the GPU there. So that's impressive. Although you'll get plenty of board vendors that will sell third-party coolers as well. EVGA has been showing they've been teasing on Twitter the 1080 Ti FTW3 that uses their ICX integration, so it's going to custom PCB, added monitoring capabilities in a 3-fan cooler as opposed to the blower style here on the Founders Edition. And I don't know, is it showing in stock? I haven't looked in a couple of days. Looks like on Amazon I don't really see any. They all look like they're out of stock. I don't know. I've been traveling the whole week, so I haven't kept up on it. But it's $699 when it is available is a really good deal. It's hard to say that out loud. It's a good deal for a $700 video card. But it is a good deal relative to where the Titan X sells at. It is a good deal relative to where the 1080 even is priced at now, even with its lower price of $499. I think $699 for $200 more, you're getting a healthy 35% boost in performance. Obviously for each person that value plot is going to be a little bit different. But it's definitely there. It looks like it's still sold out on Newegg everywhere. Yeah. So your best bet is just going to be keep an eye on what is it now in stock.net, I guess, and see that. Any other thoughts or comments on 1080 Ti? You guys didn't place a whole bunch of pre-orders, I assume. Josh, you probably ordered 3 or 4 of them.
Yes, obviously I did with my very, very deep pockets. And I forgot to change out my glasses. I'll have to do that later. Otherwise you get glare. But the thing I think I find most interesting about the 1080 Ti is the decision of NVIDIA to just say, hey, we're going to maximize die size. We're not going to go HBM with this. we are going to increase the memory controller complexity by supporting, not just GDDR5, but GDDR5X, but their performance and their TDPs, and obviously their yields and the structure are good enough to offer this type of product at this price, because 11 gigs of GDDR5X is still not exactly inexpensive. Right. And when you add up what a die that is probably in the 500 to 600 millimeter square range on TSMC 16 nanometer process, those base costs are still going to be pretty extensive. And so it's nice to see that they're offering at the price they are, the complexity that it is, when we're kind of looking at it, we're still really new along this FinFET stage for GPUs. So this is a net positive for NVIDIA, and it's an impressive product, especially considering how fast it goes and that they're able to offer it at the price they are. And this is really going to act as a huge foil against AMD's Vega, which will feature HBM2 from what we understand, and a very similar die size. So price performance is going to be pretty fascinating later next quarter when we expect to see Vega hit the streets.
Cool. And other NVIDIA news, we also now can talk about FCAT VR and the results we got from it. So if you've actually been paying attention, last week we had a live stream with Tom Peterson about the 1080 Ti, and we talked about FCAT VR, and the FCAT VR video is on our live on our YouTube page. So there's really nothing new from like a technological standpoint. So I don't feel like we need to run through that. If you're familiar with FCAT VR is very similar, except that it doesn't require hardware capture anymore. It doesn't require it to actually record the video coming out the video card onto an external system and post-process it. Now, we did do that to validate that the FCAT VR software was working, but the default version of FCAT VR should be that it runs locally, that has an interface that looks like that. It looks kind of similar to Fraps, right? You give it a directory, it has a hotkey to start, capture time and a delay, which is nice so it gives you time to put your headset on. And basically what it does is it interfaces with the Oculus and Steam VR APIs to gather performance data that they provide already in these interfaces that developers have access to when they're profiling their games, all that type of stuff. And what it does is it then generates a big CSV file full of frame times and how long did the GPU take to render versus how long did the CPU take to render versus how long did the composite render take. And it has this huge CSV file. And then what you can do is you can take that CSV file, and when I say you, I mean any editor, reviewer, professional, any just consumer that happens to have VR headsets. That if you have an Oculus Rift or an HTC Vive, you can do this. And you can import that to an Excel, and you can look at all the data and figure out what you want to do with it. That is a very painstaking process. And instead what they did was NVIDIA also built a FCAT analyzer, which is basically just a little application that you drag these CSV files into, and then you can look at all the data and how it's presented. And it presents a couple of different things. I'm actually going to have you go to, I think, just go ahead and go to the second page, and we'll go to the second graph on there that has like the blue and green lines. And I'm just going to real quick give an overview of what the graphics look like, because it is a lot of new data. And it's a lot of complex data. Yeah, we can zoom in on it. We'll scroll around through it. So on the top there, the lines that look like frame time. So we're looking at the same video. It was one video card in one game with one run. And this is data from the hardware capture and the software capture. So what you see there is the green line is the hardware capture. And because the output going to your headset is 90 hertz VSync enabled, right? You can't turn off VSync on a headset, thank God. You only are seeing frame times of either 22 milliseconds or 11 milliseconds, roughly. And then if you scroll to the right a little bit, you'll see there's some spikes and stuff like that that kind of indicate, the frame time is going back up, then it comes down, goes up, those types of things. The blue line is the frame time as presented by the software-based capture that is more accurate in terms of this is how much time the CPU and GPU actually spent rendering it. And you can see that, using the tools, you can line it up so that the runs are evenly matched, and you can see like where these spikes occur and how they affect the frame rate actually on the screen. Now, the frame rate as it's presented there, and if you scroll a little bit to the left again for me, Ken, to the where it first drops down from 22 to 11 milliseconds, what you'll see is like you can see the frame time kind of hovering up a little bit, and then it drops down just enough to hit the 11 milliseconds, and now you're running at 90 frames per second. Now, if you look at the bottom two graphs, these are what we call interval plots, and these are plots of the same amount of time, the same game, the same workload. But in this case, like the more green you have, the better. So this would be where if the bar is green all the way through and solid all the way across, that means that you're getting 90 frames per second, with no hitching, no stuttering, whatever, and it's a good experience. When you see red or yellow, something else is going on. Red indicates a drop frame. Yellow indicates a synthesized frame, which is what asynchronous space warp does on Oculus. Not time warp, space warp. If you don't know the difference between those, make sure you look them up. But like in this graph, what you see is at that point where the plot drops from all green to half green, half red, or from all green to half green, half yellow, that corresponds with the frame rate going from 90 to 45 frames per second. And so it's basically telling you that because you're getting half green, half red, on that half of the frames that you see are real frames and the other half are being dropped. Or in the yellow case, it's half of the frames are real frames and half of them are synthesized frames. So it's a really interesting way to display it. The general idea is the more green, the better. And as you go through the data, you'll see that that's generally the case, right? So in this story, I went through and we show some results like validating the tool. Here's how the capture works. Here's a example of good performance. Here's an example of bad performance. And I think it all kind of makes sense. It's a very dense topic, and so I'm not going to try to hold your hand through it because of two reasons. One, the article exists for that reason, right? It's a long story with a lot of graphs, a lot of detail that you really need to see. If you're listening to this in an audio format, it's not going to make a whole lot of sense. Two, the video we did with Tom, which is embedded on the first page of the story, or you can find it on the YouTube channel, really goes into detail about what the metrics are, how the VR pipeline works, and why it's important. The net result of this is, I believe we've vetted this tool to the point where you can use it, and I think other reviewers should be comfortable using it to validate VR performance. It's things like Fraps, things like OCAT aren't useful for VR gaming, and it took a totally different type of thing to really get it up and running. And even though the tool was built by NVIDIA, I have been using it, and a couple of other guys have been using it for a few months, and we have been able to tweak the results and the presentation of it in the Analyzer app to what I believe is a very accurate representation of what you're seeing in the headset. That as the graph changes, as the image changes that is being generated there, that what you see and experience in the VR headset is accurate. And I went through some data here that talks about compares the GTX 1060 and the RX 480. That was the most relevant data set I think we have, right? It's the most recent AMD product versus the competitive NVIDIA product. Because obviously NVIDIA has 1070, 1080, 1080 Ti, and they don't really have any competitors that are recent in the AMD front. The only other thing I would point out here is if you go to the 1060 versus RX 480 page, I want to look at that first Chronos bar graph, the high preset. And if you're not interested in getting all the line graphs and all the interval plots, and you're just looking for something to look at at a glance to get performance, this is probably what you want to look at. So this compares the 1060 to 480. There's two bars here. There's blue and orange. The blue lines represent delivered frames per second. This is what you are seeing over the test run in your headset, in the VR game itself. So you can see on the 1060, it's 90 frames per second, meaning it was very smooth. All frames were delivered in time, no issues. The RX 480, it was lower than that. It's 76 frames per second, which means you were dropping some frames there. And it was a slightly more stuttery or less complete experience. Now, what's interesting is the orange bar, which is unconstrained FPS, which basically tells you it's a calculation based on the data provided by Oculus and the Steam VR APIs that if you were not limited to 90 frames per second and you were not limited to VSync, which would be, okay, say we come up with headsets that are 120 hertz or headsets that can, go above that, or maybe you want to have higher image quality settings. How do you compare the performance of these two products in an unconstrained environment, right? Because maybe the GTX could clearly go above 90 if it wanted to. The orange line is that, so it just takes kind of the inverse of the average frame time for the that game itself. So that's where we get the 112 frames per second versus the 93. Now, interestingly, 112 is higher than 93 by about what do I have here? 13-15% or so. But if we look at, like, clearly the Vive is, or in this case the Rift is not providing 112 frames per second, and you might be wondering, well, if the RX 480 has an unconstrained frame rate of 93 frames per second, how is the delivered only 76? And that's because it will sometimes find itself just below 90. If it's running at 85 frames per second, it has to drop down to 45 frames per second in the delivered frame rate. So all of that kind of gets offset when it comes to how the numbers are actually presented. So there's lots of this type of stuff. If you scroll down two more, Ken, to the edge of nowhere, you'll see an example of next graph down. Yeah, there you go. Sorry. Where both are delivering 90 frames per second, like they're both a perfect VR gaming experience in that particular application. But then if you look at the unconstrained, you see there's a very slight edge to the GTX 1060. And this is where you get into, both of these cards provide good experiences there, but maybe you can look at this unconstrained data and say, okay, the 1060 maybe gives you a little bit more headroom, a little bit more future-proof for that particular game or other games that would be built in a similar manner. So, we go through other titles. There's, Abduction, Robo Recall. We show the benefits of multi-res shading, which is an NVIDIA-specific technology that kind of adjusts the rendered resolution of different subsections of a screen in order to improve performance when you don't need as many pixels on the outside edges, those types of things. And if you look at the three-way graph a little bit down from there, actually go down to the GTX 1080 MRS testing, and you'll see next one down. You'll see on the 1080, so it's got more headroom. You can see at MRS 0, which is what that feature turned off, your unconstrained FPS is 130. If you turn it on versus make it more aggressive, you can see how the frame rate would scale. Now, to be fair, all three of those settings provide very good experiences in the headset today. But if you're looking to kind of visualize into the future about what this specific hardware may support or how it will perform, that's kind of the benefit there. So,
and that testing was done on medium. So if you do have a 1080, I think there's a high and a very high option in that game. So you obviously have the headroom to turn up the settings, which is an important part of it. Yeah.
So we want to see things like MRS and lens match shading and all those types of features that NVIDIA has talked about being implemented in games. There's more than just raw data. I think like a sports bar or whatever it's called has that capability in there. So don't consider this article like a review of any particular products. Basically see it as an intro to us being able to include VR performance metrics in future articles, right? When we compare Vega to the 1080 Ti, we'll be able to look at standard games. We'll be able to look at VR games now have a very complete tool set and kind of look at how these things compare in, I would say, a slower growing than expected, but still a very important segment of the market for sure. So I know I rambled on there for a little while. Anybody have any particular thoughts or questions on FCAT VR before we jump into the Ryzen stuff?
Do you have FCAT vomit factor yet? Can you measure that?
No, that could be a metric that we include going forward. Yes.
It should be a nice little borderline going across the graph where nausea below and you're probably okay above.
Yeah. 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 You got to have demonstrations of, and honestly, I would be the one to know that because I was the most susceptible to this type of stuff when it first began. But
I give this title 3 pails.
Now we're talking.
Here's how many buckets you may or may not need. So let's talk about Ryzen stuff. There are several things that have occurred. Josh is going to talk in a little bit about Ryzen 5 and that announcement that was made today. Not a launching of the processor, but they've announced what Ryzen 5 will be, and how much. Did they talk about how much it will cost? I'm very curious about that, actually.
Yes, they have. But do we want to talk about Win 10 scheduler first before we get to Ryzen 5?
I do. No, okay. I do.
Let's do that.
I was just teasing. It was in the professional world, we call it a tease, Josh. We're bringing people along for the entirety of the show, right?
Like you're teasing me too. And here I thought it was just my wife.
I don't want to do that. I don't ever. No.
Wednesday
ever want to do that.
Ryan's night.
So
I'll pencil you in.
Let's talk about the Ryzen processor and Windows 10 scheduler. This is something, it got a huge amount of buzz. Allyn posted an article after he and I and Ken did some testing with the Ryzen 7 1800X. There was basically, in response to the lower than expected gaming performance at 1080p, there was one of the answers that people had was, the Windows 10 scheduler doesn't know how to properly place threads on this processor. It doesn't understand the SMP topology. Okay. And my experience and Al's experience had been that that's not the case. It is, in fact, it is accurately doing it. And so we wanted to get to the bottom. I'm sorry, go ahead. Oh, I thought somebody said something. Sorry. The LTE latency.
No, that's the cleaning lady wanting to come in.
Yeah, come on in. The podcast is started already, but you can join in. So essentially what we did was we did testing to prove that the SMT division of Windows 10 onto this processor was accurate. And we did that using a kind of handmade synthetic application. And we did that using a storage benchmark that Allyn has been using for a long time. And we, in long story short, is we clearly showed that there was proper separation of workloads across physical cores, and they weren't misrepresenting logical cores. Now, one of the things we did in that process, and I'm shortchanging this a lot because I feel like this has been in story for about a week, and we also posted a video on our YouTube channel where Allyn and I talked about it for about 30 minutes. So if you really want to get nerdy on this discussion, that's where you'll find it. But in the process of doing this, we also ran an application. So one of the things was, okay, Windows thinks that it was putting the right threads on the right processors, or on the right, putting the work on the right threads, but maybe it was misunderstanding the physical topology of the processor. Maybe it didn't. Core 1 and Core 0 weren't logical cores on the same physical core. Maybe it was Core 1 and Core 4, or Core 0 and Core 4, right? So how do we test that? How do we know that it's doing the right thing? I don't know if the video is just frozen on my side, if we're looking at the same image for this whole time, but I want to go down to the part where we're looking at the pinging of cores. So there's another application where we showed basically an application that asks for a thread to return data with no work attached. The idea being that a thread that is talking to another thread on the same physical core will have the lowest latency in the system, but a thread talking to a thread on a different physical core will have slightly longer latency, and then a thread talking to a thread on another socket would be even longer than that, because they have to talk through physical memory. So go up to the graph above that for me, Ken, so we can show the Intel one. That is what the Intel 5960X looks like. And the important part here is that those dots on the bottom are threads talking to threads that exist on the same physical core. So they have a latency of 16 nanoseconds, whatever it is. The line across the top is when any thread wants to talk to any other thread on any other physical core. So Core 1 talking to Core 3 or 7 or 8 or whatever it was. That is your about 80 nanosecond mark.
The wonders of a ring bus.
Yeah,
correct. It's all pretty damn. It's bidirectional, so it can go one way or the other. And jump spots or network nodes that you want to talk to. So it's really consistent.
Now, interestingly, Josh, I did hear that, I didn't test it yet, but that a processor with fewer cores on it, like a Kaby Lake, will have lower latency because it has less hops to go through either direction to get to the other threads.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So if you look at the next graph, though, we're looking at the Ryzen processor, and focus on the bottom part of it first, where like the X's still cross. So there you'll see the bottommost point is where threads are talking to other threads on the same physical core. And they're, it's a little bit higher than Intel, but it's consistent. So you're like 26 nanoseconds or something like that. And then the line kind of above it around the 40 nanosecond mark is when any thread talks to any other thread on the same core complex. Remember that Ryzen processors are built in quad core complexes that they then merge together on one chip. So the 8-core Ryzen 1800X is actually 2 quad core CCXs on the same system. Now, what's interesting is if you look at the top of that, where you're up to like 140 nanoseconds, that is what the communication latency is when any thread on CCX1 wants to talk to any thread on CCX2, or vice versa, right? So there's a huge latency jump when any data or communication needs to occur between the two CCXs through the infinity fabric that connects them. And so while the data on the bottom of that graph validates that Microsoft was mapping the cores to SMT threads correctly in Windows 10 through the scheduler, the line at the top was kind of new and interesting information. We didn't know what the values were of these latency or what the impact was on this latency. We assumed the latency would be higher, but we didn't know how much or to what degree. And now we look at it, and the rest of the story kind of looks at, okay, is this maybe the issue? Is it the fact that games that have very interdependent thread topologies where those threads need to talk to each other fairly often, if they're across CCXs, is that latency what's holding things up? Whereas workloads like Cinebench or Handbrake that are given chunks of data, fairly large chunks of data to go work on at a time before they have to report back, that latency isn't as apparent. It's hidden in the wash of time on those particular applications. So it's still a working theory. We still have other stuff we're working on, but even AMD came to the point where they put out a public post that said, we do not believe the Windows 10 schedulers are at fault for any of the issues that we're seeing, and they're working on other avenues of talking with game devs and whatnot. So that's kind of where we left it, right? Is I believe we proved that there's no SMT issue, and then AMD confirmed there was no SMT issue on Windows 10. And we have, I think, the best proof point that the running theory of the CCX divisions causing this performance penalty being true. I think we have the best chance of kind of showcasing that through future work if I wasn't out of town for the last week. So Josh, what's your input on this?
Something else to add in, and something we haven't tested yet, and I think that we probably will do here, hopefully soon, is we haven't addressed bus contention, because Infinity Fabric is essentially a bus that's inside. It connects all the different parts: memory controller, PCIe Express controller, the CCXs. And when you have a lot of traffic on that, how does it handle bus contention? How is latency increased, or does it stay the same when you've got a lot of traffic going from memory to CPU to graphics card to I/O when you're doing these pings? We haven't quite found that out yet, and it's something interesting that we should probably take a look at, because that could add yet another level of complexity as well as potential latency if bus contention is an issue with this current generation of Ryzen processors.
Yeah, yes, and that kind of creates a whole new set of tests we could do. Like, do we run the same latency tests while a big NVMe transfer is happening?
Run Tomb Raider. It seems to show the worst. Yeah, and do the latency and see.
And I've seen people say that if you if you overclock the memory, if you put the memory at much higher speeds, then the Infinity Fabric is running at higher speeds. And then if we do that, do we see, decreased latency in that application where it's doing thread-to-thread communication? And so there's a whole bunch of things that both AMD and the community and editors and people in forums who have these products are actually, testing through. And that's one of the things that's really cool. Despite all of the animosity and bullcrap from comments and people accusing us of being paid by NVIDIA or Intel or AMD, depending on the given week. The cool part is every once in a while you find somebody who's willing to have a really interesting discussion about the product at hand and has good input, and you're bouncing ideas off each other. It's like, okay, let's test this other thing, right? And that's kind of what happened with this story even here. And I think we have a couple of different avenues lined up to do more interesting things as well, looking at cache and all that type of stuff. And that's, when you guys talk about a little bit later in the news section about the Ryzen, FMA instruction issue, that was a forum discovered problem, right? That is, maybe not as big of a deal as it might have initially seemed, but is still important for those guys to be able to find and AMB's engineers to locate and fix. So, despite the negativity by a lot of people on this story and in forums and all that stuff and in Reddit, I'm very pleased with AMD's reaction to it. They weren't hostile about the story. They instead asked questions about how we came to these findings and duplicated it and then put out their statement. Which I don't know if that's I don't know if we want to move down the rundown to the Ryzen community update if it's the same thing, but they essentially noted that SMT performance was not affected by Windows 10 scheduler, but they also talked about temperature reporting. If you remember when we were talking about our initial review of these parts, I was confused at how good the load temperatures were and how bad the idle temperatures were. I guess that's right. Yeah. And as it turns out, on the 1800X and on the 1700X, they were accidentally adding 20 degrees Celsius offsets, if I understand this correctly, but not on the 1700, which means, when I was seeing 73 degrees Celsius overclocked temperatures, it was actually 93 degrees Celsius overclocked temperatures, which makes a lot more sense based on how much voltage we were pumping through that baby. Versus, I think when we saw idle temperatures, they were at like 50, 55 C, and now it'll be, 30, 35 C, which again makes more sense in that regard. No, wait, no, it would go the other way. No, I don't know. I still have to figure this out, but it clearly that there are some bugs needing to go through on these motherboard BIOSes. I'm hearing that we'll have updated BIOSes from most of these vendors in the next 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks, that update these issues and a couple of other things as well. So, but again, like AMD had Robert over at AMD posted this long blog post. Here's the issues that people have reported. Here's the ones we can address now. Here's the ones that we're still researching on, and they were very open and very honest about it. And I made that comment to them about being very happy that they were that overt about, hey, we have an issue and we're working on it. We're going to fix it. And, they wanted to be able to say that type of stuff faster, but every message they put out has to vet through a legal department, and, all the product managers and PR have to go through everything. So it's definitely not as easy as Allyn and I sitting around running some tests and hitting the submit button on a story, I guess. But still pretty interesting stuff. Any other thoughts from anybody on that before we move on to our final Ryzen segment before I head out?
I think there's going to be a lot more.
Completely failed me.
Say again, Jeremy?
I was just going to say this is not the first time that hardware temperature monitoring software has utterly failed me. It happens.
Yeah. I mean, it's a new system, so like you have to understand the processor is likely not reporting a number to something like AIDA64. They're reporting some variable that needs to be translated into a temperature. And if you have never seen this architecture before, it's maybe a little bit more difficult for system engineers, even BIOS engineers, clearly to really know if they're producing the right number at the end of their algorithm.
And I mean, the one that always I'm going to remember, because it's one of the reasons you ended up with me, is that bloody A7A266. Like, I was using ASUS's hardware temperature monitoring system. I can't remember what it was called at the time, but it was literally telling me I was spiking from 180 degrees Celsius down to about 30 degrees Celsius every measurement, and it made 10 measurements a second. I'm trying to think, damn, I wish I had a heatsink that could actually remove that much heat instantaneously.
Right.
It's not possible. This is fixable. I don't think it's anything to worry about. I'm sure the people making comments will disagree, but
if I were
Agreed.
to have
Josh, you're going to say something.
If I were to have a closing comment on this, it's that Ryzen isn't broken. It's not like there's some fatal flaw, some Achilles heel that is going to knock it down in a variety of workloads. A lot of these things can be fixed on the developer side by just understanding that, hey, we've got to keep these workloads and data sets so that they're aimed at the right CCXs so they can operate together and have the minimum amount of latency involved when communicating the data and results from each of the processing cores. So don't think that this is broken. It's kind of working as intended, and there are going to be workarounds, and good software developers will understand this. There are going to be flags and say, hey, if we're dealing with an AMD Ryzen, we partition out this workload on this CCX, do this on this other, and everybody's happy because information is flowing as it should. But that just is going to take some developer elbow grease to get done, and AMD is certainly, from what they said, are really partitioning out, sending out a lot of test machines to these other developers in both games and other software types to hopefully improve overall performance once they get the hang of it.
Cool. So the last thing we're going to touch on is, was it actually published out there? Yeah, it was. The AMD announced the Ryzen 5 series of CPUs today. Literally, Ryzen. I think they did it just so we could talk about it on the podcast. If I'm going to guess correctly on their timing here. And Josh, you wrote this piece up, and I'm just reading it for the first time because I wasn't part of the presentation. They have a Ryzen 5 1600X, 1600, 1500X, and 1400. Ranging from $249 down to $169. So I think this is going to be the price range where even more people are suddenly going to be interested in what the performance these offer. And the top two SKUs, the 1600 and 1600X, are 6 cores, 12 threads. And then you get down into 4-core, 8-thread parts. You talk about the coolers. We've got the clock speeds in there. It's okay, so the 6-core parts are 3.6 to 4.0 or 3.2 to 3.6, which is pretty impressive.
Yeah, especially that 1600X at 249.
Yeah, you're basically getting the same clock speeds as the 1800X for half the money. No, yeah, for half the dollars, but for 2 less cores. So it's a pretty good.
So it's equaling out the Intel i7 6800K in terms of cores and threads.
Yep. And the 6800K I think is like 330 or 350 maybe. And then this 249 is kind of in the range of the Core i5 7600K, I think, as well. And that's kind of, this is, while the Ryzen 7s were the Core i7 attack, the Ryzen 5 is likely to be the Core i5 attack, which, numerically makes sense. Probably not an accident that they did that. One question I have, and I already saw in the chat as well, is did they say in the talk whether or not it was a 4-core CCX and a 2-core CCX or 3 and 3?
I asked that, and I was not answered, and they did not go over it in the presentation, and I didn't receive any response from folks in there after the presentation was done. So
interesting.
We don't know. They didn't tell me. They certainly didn't talk about it in the presentation. So your guess is as good as mine.
I'm wondering if it's both. That depending on the die they get back, they may have some with a 4 and 2 or some with a 3 and 3. I'm curious if that's the case, what the performance implications would be of either instance, right? Like 3x3 might make the most sense in terms of balancing performance. But 4 plus 2 might make the most sense for, hey, like 4-threaded applications will be able to work better in that scenario.
I'm not
we
nearly
now have a tool that we'll be able to tell.
I was going to say we already know the threads talk to each other more quickly than the comparable Intel processor. 20 nanosecond delay versus 40 nanosecond. So the 4x2 makes more sense in a way until it jumps to the other CCX. But if you can actually get a focus on that, it might actually, you might be hunting down Bin's processors again, which we haven't done for a long time. Looking for, in my theory, the 4x2, in perhaps another, maybe it's a 3x3. Could be fun.
I think the 6-core ones, it's not as big of a difference because you're going to have 8 megs of L3 cache on each CCX, and you got 4 cores on one and 2 on the other. I think that's not going to be as big of a deal as compared to the 4-core 8-thread, because that's going to be a huge amount of potential performance. If you've got 2 and 2 on there and they decide to, possibly split the L3 in half, you're going to have a lot of interesting bus traffic over that kind of workload.
I'm sorry, did you say that the 4-core would be 2 2s or 1 4?
We don't know.
Okay.
They haven't told us. But the worst
would be probably a pretty bad situation to be in.
Yeah. I mean, 6-thread, you've got 1 full and 2 on the other CCX.
Right.
That's not the greatest, but it's not a big deal as compared. But when you got 2 and 2, and we have seen, people kind of disable cores on the CCXs and run that, and the results are not positive. So I'm real curious what AMD is going to do here with those 4-core products.
And they had to make these decisions before our story came out. Right. So I'm hopeful that they found that in their own internal testing and did something about it. Right. Like that they're going to make that decision. Because now, like I said, we have as soon as we get the parts in, we're going to be able to have that tool and look back and see what the answer is. And then, start to have another data point to tell the story of what these processors are doing and why.
I'm just waiting for core unlocking.
Right, yeah. If you get the 6-core, you can unlock it to an 8.
It's happened in the past. We lost Josh.
Yeah, Josh just dropped.
Oh no! I bet he's rebooting his internet. Well, we have 2 options. We could just pause here, and you guys can cut it in later, or we just keep on talking.
We can.
Well, but based on your dramatic pause, I think we're going to cut it here.
Well, now that we kicked Ryan out of the stream, everything smells so much better, and instead we've gotten Morry in to replace him, and he's going to talk to us about the wonderful, wonderful Kaby Lake delidding.
Flip your lid, Morry.
All right, thank you, Josh. So Kaby Lake, the whole thing with the Kaby Lake has some pretty good performance, it'll hit 5 gigahertz pretty easily, but it runs really hot. The speculation with that is that TIM that Intel used with the processor was kind of inferior when compared to the last generation. Because the last generation chips, the Skylake stuff, ran super cool. So a lot of people, and Kyle's in the chat, I think still, a lot of people, including Kyle, started delidding processors, and they would basically delid the processor, put new goop on, usually using Collaboratory Ultra or something, liquid metal type stuff, put the heat spreader back on, and you'd see a minimum of 20 C temperature decline, which was is pretty incredible. So given all this, I like to dabble that kind of stuff. I didn't want to pay for shipping to get one from Europe, though, so I actually found a local guy that makes them down in Houston. Ordered one from him. The guy owns Rocket Cool, and very easy. It's he's a machinist. It's basically a acrylic part. You put the proc in. Tighten a screw. It pops the heat spreader off very easily, very cleanly. Clean it up, and then there's another piece, the white piece you put on, and it actually guides the heat spreader back on. Of course, you have to use some kind of adhesive back. I chose to use black RTV because it's automotive safe and all, and it's electronic safe and all that stuff. But very easy, and given the testing I did before and after, I did see I saw somewhere between 15 and 20 C drop in temperatures, both overclocked and at stock settings. So, I mean, the thing is with this procedure, it's not it is a guaranteed temperature drop, but you're not guaranteed to not damage your processor. Using this device does minimize damaging your processor because you don't, there's a couple other methods you can use. You can use a razor blade to actually basically you take a razor blade around the edge of the heat spreader to break the seal on the existing adhesive. The problem with the razor blade is you could dig into the PCB. You dig into the PCB, you kill the proc, chances are. You can also use a vice method, which I actually used on my 4700K, and that works too. You basically put the processor in a vice, use a wood block, and tap it off very carefully, the heat spreader that is. That works.
Is that the one where you actually crack the die?
That's the one where I cracked the die, but I didn't crack the die in the process. I cracked the die when I actually tried to naked cool the CPU, so I will never try that again. This one, I took the heat spreader off and then glued it back down with RTV. So, but the process is very simple. You just have to go take it slow. You put the thing in the device, crack the heat spreader off, clean it real well with alcohol and some elbow grease. Now, to actually put the Cool Laboratory Ultra on, I actually used Scotch tape around the die, basically covering the PCB, so I wouldn't get any of the Ultra on the PCB because that stuff is highly conductive. It's I think it's basically liquid gallium metal, so it's got a very extremely low melting point. But you put it on, then you just put the heat spreader on, glue it back down, and give it about 24 hours to cure, and you have a brand new related proc with really nice temps.
Yeah, it looks like an old Athlon that I did the TIM on it properly.
Yeah. So it works real well. Works really well.
What's the jig cost? The tool here.
Okay, so the tool comes in two
if you
pieces.
printed it for them.
Yeah, no, actually, you can print them. If you buy it from Rocket Cool, it's $30 for the delidder, and then for the white harness to actually relay the processor, it's another $8. So it's about $40, and then maybe it's another $7 to $10 for the Cool Laboratory Ultra. And the RTV can pick up anywhere, automotive store, Walmart, wherever. But so it's not bad. It's about probably all said and done, $50 plus, 2 hours, or at least an hour or two worth of work, because again, you want to take your time doing this, and maybe a day or two down to make sure that the heat spreader is bonded to the PCB with the RTV.
Well, that's like 250 a degree, so that's not bad.
Mm-hmm.
You said about 20 degrees difference?
Yeah, if you go to the third page? Yeah, the third page is the fourth page has a performance specs. If you show those graphs in there, you can actually see the performance of both stock and overclocked. Also, the nice thing with this, once I did do the overclock, I actually saw an increase in performance. Base overclock I was able to get on this processor was 5 gigahertz with a 4.7 ring bus. Once I relidded it, I was able to push that up to 5.1 gigahertz with a 4.8 ring bus, which, yes, it's only 100 megahertz, but it's still an increase. And I had to bump the voltage a little bit, but the temps really didn't go up with that increase. So it was a nice little overall thing to do. But yeah, if you go scroll up to the overclock, the CPU overclocking graph, temp graphs, you can actually see scroll up a little bit. Yeah, see that graph right there. You can actually, this is a really good representation of the temperature savings you'll see. There was a 20 degree savings on the max temp, a 14 degree savings on the average max temp, and was that about a 15 degree savings on the overall average. So the reason why the temperatures are reported like this is because the temperatures on the Kaby Lake and for the Sky Lake and even the generation before that, the Haswell, were very jumpy. So it's best to report averages rather than absolutes as far as this stuff goes. So.
But the max is lower than the average previous.
Oh yeah, Well,
which is a
the
huge
max
data
is
point.
about 2 degrees over the overall average. So it's a significant savings.
Yeah.
Because 69 degrees C, if you're running if your room temp runs about 23 to 25 like mine does, 69 degrees C is pushing 95 to 100 degrees C on the processor temp, and nothing's going to remain stable at that point for long. So, I mean, usually a processor, you want it between, running the AVX stuff like I do for stress testing, you don't want to go over 80 to 90 C. And 90 C is really pushing the limits. I mean, 80 to 85 is usually safe with the AVX. The AVX2 stuff tends to push the heat levels and the stress levels on CPU, which is why I use them for my stress testing. But yeah,
this looks like more of a savings in temperature than it does an overall overclocking. But boy, what a savings in temp it is. So thanks, Morry. That was really interesting stuff. I'm glad you went through that, and certainly teaches us all a few things about modding your own stuff. Moving along, unless you got anything else to add.
No, the only other thing I want to say about this is that this really also, I mean, all my stuff, all the temperatures and all I reported here on water, but the relidding, with that reduced temp, it makes that 5 gigahertz speed achievable and manageable with a high-end air cooler also. So with the stock Kaby Lake, I really would not recommend using an air cooler because you probably melt the thing. So
I guess I won't be overclocking anytime soon.
Yeah.
Who's got NVIDIA Jetson TX2, Jeremy or Ken? Who's more interested in these things?
I mean, ARM SSC really screams Jeremy to me, so.
Yeah, well, it certainly does now. And you didn't put Jetson into the tag, so I can't find the one I did as well. But the number one thing I learned, because I was looking for a good title, is that the Jetsons theme song only had 4 lines in it. It's damn hard to make a good joke out of just 4 lines. But this is the brand new Pascal GPU from NVIDIA. And it's a nice friggin' jump from what the previous version was.
Isn't that essentially the size of an SSD?
Smaller, I think.
It's smaller. There we go. I'm trying to see here. So essentially what they did was, and it was for Onyx, for idiot stick in the chat, that did this. So they've essentially doubled. You've got 4 gigs of low-power DDR4 as opposed to 4 in the previous generation. The memory bandwidth is almost doubled, up to 58.4 gigabits a second, or gigabytes a second. eMCC storage is about the same at about 32 gigabytes. And the other thing that it added, if I can find it, is it's now a pair of Denver 2 CPUs. They're 64-bit, 4 Cortex A57s, and Pascal graphics, which on something this itty-bitty is kind of impressive to see. I mean, I'll toss up the link here. I got a different shot of it where you can actually see the wireless antennas coming off of it, the USB coming off of it, and get a better idea of just how tiny this bloody little thing is. It's going to offer a lot of power for people that are looking for something very small, very programmable, for very niche markets. I mean, it's not going to end up in your next build. On the other hand, if you're running Linux and it runs the Jetpack 3.4, which is based off of the Linux 4.415 kernel, which is one of the long-term service branch kernels, so it's going to be around for a long time. This is something you can sort of look at if you've got something that you need extremely low power, a decent amount of storage, frankly, a ridiculous amount of connectivity, and you want to develop something. This is going to do just about anything you could want it to, and a bit more.
Yeah, I actually have a couple of friends still in school who do autonomous vehicle stuff, and this is the perfect sort of platform to run that stuff on.
Yeah.
Because, you're doing a whole lot of computer vision stuff and GPU accelerated stuff that's easily GPU accelerated, and you probably want to start to get into deep learning at that point, neural networks, because that's the hotness for autonomous vehicles. So for a $900 dev kit, especially if you're talking about things like education and auto and all of this stuff, it's a drop in the bucket and a really quick way to prototype something. With the Linux dev kit tools seem to be pretty well developed. Everything is just kind of integrated. You can run CUDA just directly from the Linux install on it and not worry about hardware, but worry about your code instead, which is definitely a big advantage.
Yeah. Well, and the long-term service branch means you're not going to be recompiling in Linux again just to try and figure out how the hell to make everything work. It's going to keep working. I'd love to see how this sort of stacks up against some of the stuff that's been out for 2 or 3 years that people are just absolutely and totally used to. The one thing I didn't see, and it might just be that it didn't look hard enough, was a nice socket for a bridge on top of it to add more shields to it, like Arduino does.
I don't think they do that. They have that 40-pin breakout, so
yeah,
or that 200. I think it's like a 200-pin breakout. So I think that'd be possible. I don't think that's a whole lot because it's not a lot to add to the dev board, and it does have things like serial and USB. So it might not be necessarily a tidy package, but you can add on peripherals. It's pretty easy.
If you actually need them.
And so I think this is like a secret market that NVIDIA has done pretty well in, because this is like the 4th or 5th Jetson board maybe. They've kind of done it for just about every Tegra generation. And I don't think they would keep doing them if it was such a sort of drain. I don't know. Seems pretty cool.
I think they're making money. I think they've been launched in a couple of cars recently. I think they've shown up in stuff that actually was just purely AMD before, where it was just ridiculously low power, multiple graphic solutions. This little baby is going to be showing up there, and in your one-arm bandits as well, probably. It's interesting. ARM people, stop emailing me. I'm interested, but not that into you.
You want a 2U chassis just filled with these things? Oh God, we lost Josh.
Sure. We should have talked about FMA3 first. To kill time, and because we were just sort of talking about self-driving cars and, what's going into it, NVIDIA's got some competition. It would seem that Intel just managed to buy out Mobileye. Mobileye is, and I'm sure you've run into these guys as well, Ken. They're a computer vision company. There's a history between them and the Tesla, which honestly I didn't really read that much into, apart from there's a little bit of bad feelings between the two, but you will find this on the Model S. It is actually the Model S.
You'll find it on the Autopilot 1.0 Model S. It's the 2.0. I don't know what hardware's in there. I think it might be NVIDIA hardware at this point, because of how much those two companies have talked and worked together. But Mobileye was powering the Autopilot 1.0 stuff, which is what Ryan's car has, and was sort of the initial Autopilot thing that went out. And from what I understand, they essentially had like an SoC or a single ASIC that would do a lot of the functions, but it wasn't necessarily something that you could expand upon. Whereas Tesla Autopilot 2.0 is sort of turning every car into a neural network and taking in data, and they've been pushing out updates to add additional functionality, and they say this is all of the hardware they'll need to reach full autonomy. So Mobileye seemed to be a pretty good start and get them there with their current products, but just sort of no path forward is sort of how I understand the situation. But
if Intel gives you $15.3 billion,
I think they might be working on something. It's just a thought.
I mean, the thing I as soon as I read this, I'm thinking Intel. I'm picturing Intel Inside and a very tragically literal blue screen of death as they move to Windows for the operating system running in the car.
Ford did that for a while. It worked out all right for the.
Yeah, but then they went to QNX because BlackBerry.
That was the one smart acquisition that RIM/BlackBerry has had. Like, if they didn't buy QNX, that company would be so dead. But as it turns out, they ended up buying one of the companies that makes. I think they might be the only one, or there's one competitor for auto-approved mobile operating systems.
Yeah, and I can't even name it.
Yeah, it's like...
I know it's there, but
Yeah, it's like Autos, and I have a friend who does factory automation stuff, and they use QNX because they need real-time operating system, so... It's like BlackBerry's just the QNX company, and they occasionally come out with the overpriced Android handset, I think, at this point.
Yeah. Well, they're trying to emulate IBM at this point. They've gone from a hardware company to a patent company. They just can't get rid of the hardware because it's a bit of a fetish of theirs, and I really wish they would because, I
swear, we're going to get it right this time. We're going to get it right.
Oh, I miss the old keypad. You guys all know I despise my little touchpad on my phone. I like keys. They work. They make sense. They don't make up words as I'm trying to type because they think my finger is going to go somewhere and they predict. That's the word I was spelling.
BlackBerry's definitely did do that sort of prediction. It was better, but
it was a lot better than iOS or again Android.
Let's just bring back T9 and just use T9. Yeah, the ultimate prediction.
Cell phone enabled calculators. I like it.
All right, shall we see if we got Josh back yet?
He thinks so.
He thinks so. So let's see how that'll work.
Is everyone ready for the sound to just go insane?
Yeah.
Yeah, headphones off.
If you're wearing headphones, maybe just kind of for a little bit.
We'll see.
So our next story, after that small interruption by my internet, again provided by Spectrum, is the issues of Ryzen performance when running FMA3 workloads. It causes severe crashes, not just crashes, but hard locks. HWBot, a forum, has an individual there was able to replicate an issue with a certain workload using FMA3, and it constantly caused Ryzen processors to hard lock. He released the source code. Multiple other people have run it, and it shows the same behavior on any stock clocked Ryzen processor. So somebody tried it with an overclock, and it came out to be about 25% of the people were able to actually run this workload. So what it kind of tells us is that power is not being delivered adequately to the floating point SIMD portions of the Ryzen chips, and so it was going under apparent increased and greater load and causing it to just lock up because there was not enough voltage or power being delivered to those, so it just couldn't complete its work and it hard locked. The guys who had it overclocked usually had higher voltage being applied across the entire chip. So they had harder running chips, and it just seemed to work perfectly fine for about 25%. Now, AMD has not officially said anything about this, but we have heard from sources inside AMD this is a legitimate problem, and it is going to be addressed through a firmware update on the BIOS. So this means the AGESA protocol, which is kind of a bootstrap protocol that sets some of the lower level performance and characteristics of processors from AMD. So it's going to be a fix through there. You're going to need to update your the BIOS on the motherboard, which is kind of required anyway, considering the issues that people have had on AM4 products so far. So it's an issue, something to watch out for. It is a bug, but it is one that looks to be fixable through firmware and the necessary power application when your chips are running these type of workloads.
Totally
So
not
that's
looking
it.
at you,
That's-
Intel, with several famous bugs under your belt that couldn't be easily fixed.
Yeah, it's like what Skylake had a issue
Computational
like
error
this that
Yeah.
they fixed.
There's the whole Voton thing.
and the old FDiv.
Yeah,
Which
FDiv
we
on,
can never
on,
forget
on
the
the original
FDiv.
Pentium. And remember, AMD is not without fault here too. The original
True.
Phenom B2 revisions had I can't remember what the cache thing was for a lookup that they had to disable, and it
That's
caused
what they call it, a
pretty big
RATA,
drop
right?
in performance. But the B3 revisions fixed it.
As it turns out, CPUs kind of hard.
Yeah.
You're dealing with many billions of transistors and really complex structures throughout. So yes, you got to expect it. And frankly, it's a miracle that any of them work at all.
Yes.
It's true.
We have a
Unless you're
thing
one of the
that we
people
call
that make their
PFM.
comments.
Yeah,
If you're one of the
PFM,
people that make
pure
our
frickin'
comments,
magic.
apparently Keller designed this entire architecture by hand. Every single chip out there is actually done by his hand, and he left no notes. So no one in AMD knows how any of them work anymore.
He got a
I learned
drafting
that from our
table,
commenters.
and he just went at it.
Yep.
That's all you need. Slide
He has
rule,
Hercules
drafting table.
hands.
Well, that's it. That is all the news and reviews for this week. It's been a busy week. Next week looks to be just as busy, and the week after that, it's kind of been a crazy Q1, Q2 in the industry, and you know what? We like it. We
That
like
piece
lots of
last
new
year.
things. Yeah, it's
Last
nuts.
year was
And
like, so that thing we talked about last week, we're going to talk about it again because we got nothing else.
Yeah, so we've got
This year?
Vega coming up. We've got more Ryzen processors. We got motherboards. People are going to be exploring memory. Now we actually see a reason to buy the higher speed memory, especially with Ryzen products. So you need at least 3200 megahertz to get really good performance out of them. It's an interesting and changing landscape, and it's one we enjoy covering, obviously. And it's good for us, good for you guys to listen to, because certainly we have new stuff every week. Throwing that with VR. And Kyle's got his new thing that's hopefully going to go live here in a while. And, it's just a lot of really interesting and exciting times up ahead. But with that, let's hit our hardware and software picks of the week.
Hey Josh, while you're going through the rundown, is Naples Q4 or Q3?
No, it's Q2.
Q2? So
Should be
Naples
Q2.
is supposed to be Q2.
So that's coming up real
It's going to be
soon,
late
too.
Q2, but Q2.
All right, looking forward to that.
It can't possibly be close to Q2. 2017 just started. Don't be ridiculous.
Oh, man. Yeah, we're what, 2 weeks away? 2.5 weeks?
Ken, it
Insane.
just keeps going
There's
faster
also
and
rumors
faster.
that Skylake X
Oop.
hitting in beginning of Q3. They're saying GamersCon or something like that is a thing. in
Gamescom.
August. Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. It wouldn't be the first time Intel has launched a CPU at Gamescom. So
Yeah. And they will certainly do something to shore up some potential losses they have to AMD. And they're a competitive company. Hardware, software picks of the week. Ryan had one, and it's his unending love of air travel and delays.
Delta,
due to weather.
Delta.
Yeah, he's had absolutely no luck. So he left. He was supposed to leave at like 7:30 a.m. from Cincinnati, and it ended up leaving like at 4:30 p.m. that day.
and definitely not his original flight either.
No, there's nothing original about how he made his way out to the West Coast.
So, and
We'll just skip to this and to say Allyn, he also has had some interesting air travel experiences. So weather in between fog and snow has been pretty rough across the U.S.
Alan's original flight today was routed was supposed to go through Chicago, and then they rerouted it to try to go through DC.
And where's he trying to get to?
Sacramento.
Wow. Yeah, so fun times for everybody in the air, and we send our best regards to those suffering.
I'm glad I did my traveling last week.
Oh, wait, what?
Glad I did my traveling last week.
Yeah. And here I'm sitting in like 56-degree weather and calm in Wyoming, of all places. Makes no sense. Jeremy.
It's a fun world we're living in. And Kyle, we've already, we're trademarking the bucket benchmark for VR. So sorry you can't use that on your new site. You'll have to figure something else out. Am I sounding that bad? Or was that just a weird feedback?
Just
thing?
Move it. Just go.
All right. So it's an oldie, but it's a goodie, because in Canada, SSDs are freaking expensive. But hey, how about a nice 850 Evo M.2, 500 gig for $209? If you shop in Canada, you will know what this is. This is a damn good deal. If you shop in the US, you're probably laughing at us. But hey.
Oh, that's 157 real dollars.
Yeah.
That seems pretty good to me.
It's actually probably decent down there.
And that's a really nice SSD. I've got one of those running in my main system.
Yeah.
Like that, because
that's
the
just an
960
SSD.
is the new hot stuff.
Yeah, but do you really
NVMe.
need that? I mean, come on.
You're not going to notice the bloody difference. And if you're building an AMD system, you want to save a couple of bucks, but you got two M.2 slots probably. Here you go. Slap one of those in there and just enjoy.
Well, fine.
Josh, what are you slapping in?
We don't want to go there. Okay, we do. The GTX 1080. Now that the price has gone down, and they're including a pretty good game, either with For Honor or the Ghost Recon Wildlands. The Ghost Recon game looks really, really impressive. Not just graphically, but in terms of gameplay. Something I'd really kind of like to get into, but of course, I'm still trying to play Oblivion, so I'll never have the time. But yeah, it's a MSI GTX 1080 G Gamer Edition for $517. So we have the price cuts for the 1080 actually hitting the world. Is that not the correct link?
No, it is. I was just adding it to my cart to see the real price.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
So anyway, yeah, it was about $517 if I see it correctly. So it's nice, good card, fast card. Comes with a nice game. If you're looking for a GPU upgrade, this is a pretty decent one. Unless you really just want to wait for that 1080 Ti at $200 more.
This turns out I'm good.
I want to see Vega. Damn it.
Yeah, maybe someday. Ken, show us what you want.
Look at my eyes. Now look slightly over at my headphones. You see these headphones? Don't they look very comfortable?
I'm sorry, I'm still lost
And
in your
Siri
eyes.
decided to wake up for some reason. But these are the Beyerdynamic DT 770 Pro 80 ohm version. I think I bought these in 2011 and I've been using the same pair. I did have to change the velour coverings on the earmuffs here. Yeah, the velour. These are actually the most comfortable headphones I've ever worn. I can wear these for 12 hours straight and they don't really get sweaty or anything. They're certainly not what you would call reference monitors. They're a little bit colored. They're a little bit heavier on the base than sort of flat studio monitors, which I tend to enjoy a little bit with some of the music I listen to. But for about $150, I've really enjoyed these headphones over the past 6 or 7 years that I've owned them, and I think they're kind of my go-to recommendation for someone looking in the sub $200 range at headphones. I did have a bit of trouble finding any listings for them. This one on Amazon isn't Prime, which I thought was weird, but usually about $150 is where they sit. And yeah, 80 ohms is just that sweet spot where you can kind of drive it by your motherboard without a special headphone amp or your phone or whatnot. if you try to get, there's a 30 ohm and a 250 ohm version of these headphones as well. The 30 ohms kind of don't have that oomph you'd want. I think the 80 is a good balance between sort of having the bass response that you're looking for in some just general purpose headphones, and then 250 you'd have to carry around a dedicated headphone amp, and I'm just not about that life at this time. Sebastian can say what he want. I'm not about that life.
How's the sound isolation on those? Can you?
These are open. They have other similar ones in their line that are closed. I forget. Or no, well, these are semi-closed. We'll say. If you have them cranked, they'll leak out some noise, but beyond that, they're not too bad. And I can I could hear you not on the microphone, standing a couple of feet away. So they're good for an office environment where no one's really going to hear your music, and you're still going to be able to tell what's going on around you. I did have one complaint at the build quality. These little plastic pieces broke at some point in the life of my headphones, so I 3D printed replacements because the model is available, because this is a fairly common issue, and I didn't feel like ordering the parts from Germany because that sounded like a waste of time. But yeah.
And money.
Yeah. Headphones are certainly a personal thing, but these are the ones that I enjoy.
And they've
80
got the
ohm.
sweet velour.
They are extremely comfortable.
That's all that matters.
They really are.
Morry, tell us what you got. What you really got.
All right, so browsing Steam like I do on a daily basis, looking for good deals. I came across this new game that's about to be released from Square Enix called Nier Automata. It looks like it's not quite a first person. It could be a blend of a third and first person. Maybe you may be able to change the view. I'm not sure. 'Cause again, it's unreleased, but it's got some RPG aspects to it. Gameplay looks really cool. It's kind of a far future robot versus evil computer overlord type thing, where you're basically in the human controlled robots coming back to the Earth to destroy the computer overlords. It looks really cool. It could be decent. Again, it's unreleased, so I don't know for sure, but just from the preview looks and all, it looks like it could be decent. It seems to support all the high-end stuff. It needs DirectX 11, all that good stuff. So it could be a really decent game, especially if you're into the whole cyberpunk type far future sci-fi type games. So
And big swords.
And big swords and lots of guns, yes. And floaty little robot helpers.
I've heard a lot of good things about this game. It seems pretty awesome if you go watch some video of people playing it.
It's not VR. This is just a regular thing. I mean, I don't have a VR rig. I'm probably not going to get a VR rig for quite a while. The wife would have to greenlight that, and that's far, far down on her list of anything she'd let me buy. So.
But we got a new kitchen coming in, so I feel your pain. Feel the pain. All right, well, that is our show for this week. You can catch reruns of this at pcper.com/podcast. You can follow Ryan at twitter.com/rshrout. No, Ryan Shrout. Or you could follow the PC Per official at twitter.com/PCPer. Don't forget to subscribe. We would love your Patreon stuff. Certainly, did Ryan ever get around to actually reading off some names?
No, he didn't.
Nope.
No. Too many technical difficulties from me. I apologize.
Thanks, Josh.
Oh, that, and he was on the toilet the whole time.
Well, that too. So, but it was a big relief to him. Big.
I hope so.
Yeah. And with that, guys, I'm Josh Walworth.
I'm Jeremy Hellstrom.
I'm Morry Titleman.
And Ken Addison.
And the man behind the screen who we shouldn't pay attention to.
Hi, guys.
Alex L. Have a good night.
If you enjoyed this content, consider supporting in-depth technical content by contributing at patreon.com/PCPer.